Welcome to the Transform Your Workplace podcast. I've got Anna Miners here with me. She's from Cascade Centers. Anna, good to have you in the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And I've got her here in person. We're going to talk about a book, Dying for a Paycheck, How Modern Management Harms Employee Health and Company Performance and What We Can Do About It. You read this book.
I did.
What did you think?
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I think that this book does a good job of highlighting sort of the systemic impact of the workplace on employee health. So I think with employee health and well-being, a lot of times people really focus on like the individual attribution and sort of what we can do personally to take care of ourselves and be healthier. And so many workplace wellness programs focus on that, but don't recognize how much the system or the context in which we exist impacts people's well-being. So I thought it did a nice job of sort of highlighting that in a way that was easily digestible.
In the intro, there's a quote I loved. It said, "Leaders should ensure at the end of the day their employees return home in good shape, prepared to live fulfilled lives outside of work." To me, that was like it set the stage for the entire book.
Yeah.
I don't know if employers are really focused on that to make sure that their employees are not burned out by the time they get home.
Right.
They're not thinking about work necessarily when they get home. There's such a bleed over into the personal lives, and their personal lives are they're stressed out. They're bringing it back to work, and it's just like this vicious cycle.
Sort of the interrelated nature of it all. And I think, a lot of workplace wellness programs, not all, I mean, definitely there are some employers that are really focused on the well-being of their people as whole people.
Yeah.
But a lot of employers are really focused on health and wellness from a cost containment standpoint.
Yeah, I believe that.
And that's a big driver for them. And so there has to be both, right? That it is a big expensive issue, and people are people, and to care for people as whole people.
I think it's interesting. I think employers are thinking about it a lot more. This book sheds a lot of light on the fact that if people are unhealthy, it actually drives up a lot of costs. The productivity goes down. Like there's so much data inside this book. So be prepared if you plan to read it. But
I know some of it is a little intimidating with the statistical analysis and the methodology of all the research. I'm like,
well, it's funny. I open up the book. I'm like, oh gosh, like 300 pages. Oh wait, no, 100 pages of it is like notes,
citations. Yeah,
it's
a little intimidating, all the research. But
I know. Do you think employer decisions in the workplace actually affects human health?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I think, think about how much time we spend at work and how invested people are in their sense of self, and then also just sort of like necessity, right? You need your job for your economic security. So definitely, the things that happen in the workplace, the decisions that are made impact people's well-being. And I think that's kind of the whole crux of his position, is that employers need to be more mindful about how their decisions are impacting people. And that it's not just a exercise more situation.
Yeah. I actually screenshotted this and I'm looking at it right now. So page 43 of this book, to my last question of you, employer decisions that affect health, there's like a list of 10 things.
Oh, yeah.
And I wouldn't even have thought about some of these things, but like not having health insurance, shifts that you're working, long hours, job insecurity. I mean, the list goes on, but it's like all these like little things that employers actually affect in one way or another affects health at the end of the day.
Right.
Whether it's their stress on the job or they bring it home and then they have like family conflict or whatever.
Yeah.
I never would have thought about that.
Yeah.
I mean, you probably deal with this all the time in the line of work that you're doing.
Right. Yeah. So some of those things, to me, it's like research is putting words to, psychology's good at proving something. They're like, oh, that makes sense. Why didn't we recognize that? But definitely putting words to and data to how much those things, like the working long hours, shift work, those kinds of things that really does impact people's health. And, you can have the best self-care in the world, but if you have rotating shifts and you get off work at 11 p.m. and you're back at work at 7 a.m. the next day. You know, that's, to me, like, obviously, you know, that's going to impact somebody's well-being. I recognize certain industries are more challenged with how to manage that, but how much that really does impact people's well-being and access to care and impact in their families and all those kinds of things.
Yeah. I mean, you brought up a good point there, like with certain industries. It's like, how do you get around, you know, the shifts that are, they work long. Like, I've worked in a union job before, where in college, where I'm like, you know, I'd work till 9 p.m. and then I'd be back at 6 a.m. or something like that. I mean, those are crazy. The money's good, but at the end of the day, like, your health is taking a toll. Like, how do you even avoid that in certain industries?
Well, I think there's two parts of that. One is the industry piece, but then kind of to your point, the money is good. So I think people do get in a position where they're trading their health and well-being for, you know, out of necessity. They need the job, they need the money. And it depends on the industry, but some jobs, you know, people don't feel like they have a lot of other choices. You sort of get, can't remember the term, but like in the construction industry, there's data on how people feel like they won't be able to find that level of pay, you know, somewhere else with the training and experience and education that they have. So they kind of get stuck, like gridlocked in a job. So you don't feel like you have any other options.
That's unbelievable to me.
But as an employer, and then definitely certain industries, I mean, the construction industry is a good example. You know, there's high volume of work at this time of year, and you have to get the job done, and the days are longer, and and then you're not doing as much in November, rainy November. But I think the book highlights that it kind of has to start from like a policy standpoint or sort of a larger structure standpoint, and then filter down through employer decisions. Yeah. And there are, so we're, you know, here in Oregon, I actually was just looking this up the other day because this sparked interest for me. So, you know, like what are, and there are guidelines, laws in Oregon around how far in advance people need access to their schedules. So not scheduling people sooner than 7 days out, and what I mean by that is one of the big problems with work-family rub or conflict is that if people are trying to plan childcare, their caregiving responsibilities, and they don't know what their work schedule is going to be like next week, that's really hard to do. And so currently the law is 7 days. It's going to change in July actually of this year. Yeah,
didn't even know that.
To 2 weeks, 14 days notice for people's shifts to change. So I recognize that it puts a pull, and some of these topics can be kind of political, right? Because there's varying interests. So that puts a pull on employers, but it does help employees as far as their individual well-being and their family well-being. So anyways, all that to say, I think it does have to start from like a policy standpoint or sort of a systemic structural standpoint, and then move down through employers, because there will be employers that will say, we're making this decision because we think it's in the best interest of our employees and this is what we're doing. But that's not going to be all employers. Yeah.
And when you say policy, you mean like at the government level?
Right.
And then filter that. So like I always think of, here's an opportunity for employers to just adopt a best practice or to, because it's the right thing to do. It's in the best interest of the employees. And at the end of the day, like, they're going to be more productive, healthier at work. Their minds are right. Like, I would think it's in their best interest as well. But I do realize there's an opportunity for a lot of employers to adopt some of these ideas in this book and do right by their employees so that they're happier, they're healthier, they're doing better work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm biased for sure because I am interested in employee health and well-being, but I also recognize that there's two sides to every story, and I really am not well educated about how, you know, economics, you know, Econ 201 is pretty much the maximum level I went on that. You know, like, I know that when you're talking about changing the way shifts happen, giving people more rest time, then you might have to hire more people. Well, then that obviously has an impact on operations and overhead and then so on and so forth. So I don't think that there's ever really like a perfect scenario, but there's got to be some kind of balance between the two. So again, I mean, am biased towards, it makes sense. People are healthier and more productive. And I think that's the argument of the book, is that these decisions do impact companies in a positive way in their bottom line, but it's not without challenges. I think it's hard to get there. And there's sometimes limited motivation to do anything that way.
This book really highlights the negative impacts of employer decisions. I mean, I feel like the majority of the book really talks about that.
I know,
like
it is a bit of a downer.
The title is literally Dying for a Paycheck. Like in different chapters, they talk about certain things. One in particular, they talk about how layoffs are really impactful to not only just employees, the culture of the work or the business or organization, but also like societal, like there's impacts at the society level too. Talk about that. Like what did you kind of get from that section?
That was interesting to me, because I think that we do often think about these situations in like microcosms. So how does it impact these specific employees or this specific company, or maybe even this industry? But then the broader sort of societal costs of absorbing, and that's not even the personal impact, right? But just from a cost standpoint, absorbing people that don't have jobs and people that don't have health insurance, and the long-term impact of that. One thing that he said in the book I thought was interesting was around delaying care. If you have a gap in employment or health insurance, that even if you are get a job somewhere else relatively quickly, that you still delay your access to care because there's that gap in your income.
Absolutely.
And healthcare is so expensive for people. So that was kind of an interesting standpoint, because I think a lot of times we're considering just individuals at that organization, and then nothing to say of obviously like the huge emotional blow to people and their families, and then people that remain at the organization.
That was the part that I thought was a little scary. I mean, you probably remember back in 2008, 2009 timeframe where I'm sure at some point you had somebody in your family or a friend or somebody who's laid off. And in the back of your mind, you're like, okay, well, I still have my job, but I could go at any moment. Like, I think that for people remaining in the organization, that's what probably goes through their head is like, oh my gosh, so-and-so just got laid off, or a bunch of people just got laid off. I'm next. That
insecurity.
Yeah.
I think that that's influenced a generation, honestly.
It has.
In my observations and talking with people, is that not only is it if that happened at your company, but if that happened to someone or I was just early in my career at that point, but a lot of my friends and people I know that are in that same generation, that's sort of their mindset, is like nothing's for sure.
Exactly.
And a lot of people he talks about like the gig economy, right? A lot of people do have like side gigs, everyone's selling like lipstick or whatever. It's like the Mary Kay.
Mary Kay
of this
it's
time.
expanded into
exactly.
bajillion industries now.
I feel like everybody kind of has a backup plan. And some of that
smart.
Some of that is, and I don't know, I mean, this is just my personal observation, and I don't know how much that's true for people that are later in their careers, but it does seem like millennials and people that are younger Gen X folks that kind of are like, nothing's for sure. I have a backup plan. I appreciate what I've got, but I'm always kind of looking. And we see that shift in that movement in the workplace anyways, that people don't stay. And I'm wondering, like, how much of that is because of that sort of...
Oh, I believe it. I mean,
nothing's for sure.
You were just saying that you basically started in your professional career right around that time. Same here. Like, I was basically right out of college, started at Xenium here in 2008. I just remember, like, we were stable here, but... the employers that we were helping, like layoffs, and I mean people in family and friends, and just nothing was for sure. And so you always got to have a backup plan, and that's, I think to this day, that's still why I do a little bit of side work.
Yeah, right. I do think. I mean, again, that's just my opinion. There's no
no data behind.
There's nothing behind it. It's just an observation.
It's hard. I think it's hard to. How do you do a study for something like that? I mean, like, it's because it's in the back of our minds for the most part. Like, sometimes it's like, it's not even a conscious decision. It's like, oh yeah, like I enjoy doing some side work. So,
right.
But it's like, I guess to somebody else, it might look like a backup plan, but for me, it's just like, I enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, that was kind of what was interesting. Another thing that was interesting to me in this book that we're talking about is some of the studies that they were able to do. Longitudinal studies that span decades is always really fascinating to me. Like, how do you even keep people engaged and find data over that period of time? But yeah, that insecurity piece is, I think it's really pervasive, and it's not, back to your kind of question, it doesn't just impact the person or their company. I think it is a broader sort of societal, everybody's a little bit concerned.
Hey, Brandon here to take a quick break to talk about the annual What People Want from Work survey presented by Xenium HR. The survey offers a look into your workplace through your employees' eyes. We're going to reveal what's working, what needs improvement, and what your employees want from the workplace. We're going to cover areas like leadership, workplace culture, management support, rewards and recognition, work environment, and so much more. It's a mix of qualitative and quantitative data. The deadline to register, July 31st, 2019, and the survey will be open until August 31st, 2019. You'll get a free report in the end to tell you all about what your people want from work. You'll get your scores in a nice PDF report. If you want to participate, go to xeniumhr.com/survey and you can sign up right away. Now back to the show.
They spend some time talking about health insurance and how the lack of coverage or no coverage at all really impacts the well-being of people. This is a huge societal issue right now.
And such a political hot topic.
It's such a political hot topic. We could honestly spend an entire podcast talking about this and never solve anything.
Gosh, if we could solve something.
Well, if we could solve something seriously, because I think there's a lot of people out there that they believe it's a right, the universal health care should be provided because we're, a wealthy economy. Politics aside, what do you think the implications of like not having health insurance and any sort of access to care, like what does that do to a person?
I mean, that's essentially his whole chapter, right, on health insurance. But I'm sure you hear and see stories too. I mean, just this week, what is today, Tuesday? So yesterday, someone was talking to me about needing, and I think the issue is that a lot of people have health insurance, but they have a really high deductible.
Absolutely. So like
high co-pays.
They're spending so much money out of pocket before they even get
So they're delaying access to care. They're waiting until it's critical. And so in my work, in the mental health field, people will have symptoms and disruption for a long time before they seek care because they're like, I can't afford my $3,000 or $5,000 deductible. I mean, part of what a big stressor for people, I think he talks about the two biggest stressors for people are work and money, right? Yeah. So if you're really stressed out at work and you're really worried about money, am I going to go and spend X amount to get counseling? Like, that just makes my problem worse, right? Like $5,000 of deductible. So just yesterday I was talking to somebody that needs medication but can't afford it, and so they just don't take it.
To me, like there's I get the whole point of insurance. Like I think it should be used for catastrophic stuff, but then there's this huge gap of like preventative, and I think is what we're describing is like the regular stuff to prevent some of these like really bad diseases or health issues that could have been solved upstream, but like to get care initially is like people are waiting, and it's not in their best interest to do that. I think there's a huge gap, and that's I think why employers are getting into this wellness program thing. Their EAP, for example, like their employers are starting to provide some resources, but I think overall we just have a huge flaw in the way the system's built.
He talks about that in the book too, the employers that are offering, think about the employers that are really well known for offering great benefits. Yeah. So people go work there. Maybe they're excited about the job, but mostly they're excited about the benefits.
You think so?
Yes.
It says in the book, right?
Yes, but I see that. I mean, and also people that are pretty miserable in their job, don't really like their job, or aren't feeling like it's fulfilling to them, don't like their coworker, whatever it is. They're unhappy in their job, but they stay there because they need the benefits.
That's
or their family needs the benefits, right? So they get locked into a position. And I hear people say that a lot. I also think like something he talks about just a little bit, but back to your point about preventative care is some people, if we had access to preventative care, it's back to dependence and eligibility for insurance and all that. So some of the things that people could have received preventative care services for and some kind of early intervention, they don't because they can't afford it. And then it compounds, and then they're workers, and then, and so, yeah, to get upstream. I don't have the answer. I don't know. I just thought it was a really interesting observation he made. And I see it, and I hear people talk about those things, that they do feel stuck in their positions. Again, we talked about pay, but health insurance, I think people...
Even with people with health insurance, to your point, it's like, okay, what good is it doing? Because I'm just waiting for the time where, like, my kid breaks his leg, or could happen. Like at the individual level, there's deductibles, and like that was your point, like high deductible. Okay, broken leg, emergency room visit, paying out of pocket before you even getting any care. Like that's for people who don't save. Most people don't save.
Oh, that's a whole other conversation. Yeah, I mean, back to the biggest worry being work or biggest stress being work and finances. I mean, most people can't afford an unexpected expense like that.
Yeah, so I think the solution is employers should just pay for everything, right? Like 100% out of pocket.
Right? Yeah. No,
employees
but
pay
so
for
then the other part of it is employers, like, okay, so think about being one of those employers that we were just talking about that offers great benefits. And he talks about this in the book. Then people that are attracted to that flock, he calls it flock there, because they want their benefits. Well, what kind of position is that to be in as an employer, right? Like,
providing everything.
Yeah, because then that's really expensive to them. And are they getting maybe the best quality candidates? Are they getting the candidates that are
maybe not? Maybe, I don't know.
Sicker. I don't know. I really don't know, but it's an interesting conversation but like point he has in that book.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. I think we're not going to obviously solve anything, but it is a good point to make. There was later on, it talked about the health impacts of like working really long hours, and I thought this was an interesting point because I think with today's world of like technology, and especially for the information worker, like the white collar worker, so to speak, like, you're always connected. Right. And so like the working long hours back in the day usually meant like working in a factory for 12 hours at a time. Now it means something totally different. You're always connected. You're always expected to be on. Like talk about that. And what do you think about that entire piece?
Yeah, that's really
probably what you're dealing with a lot in your work.
Really fascinating to me. I'm going to go on a side trajectory for a second, come back to this. But at PSU and OHSU in their organizational behavior programs, and at OHSU they have a National Institute of Occupational Health Sciences research center. So they're doing all this research on this and conflict, work-family conflict, and how some people prefer to have a really strong separation, right? Like when I'm done with work, I'm done with work, and then I want to be with my family. Or some people really feel like that gives them a benefit to have that ability to integrate, right? Like I can be at soccer practice, but also still responding to email. And in the olden days, right, back before we had tech in our hands, you wouldn't necessarily be able to be at soccer practice. You'd have to be wherever you were. So people have different preferences, I guess, as far as how they use work technology to integrate into their life and how that benefits them. But the other sort of interesting thing is across all populations, all working populations, is just like you said, the constant being turned on. Like, and maybe you're not even working, but you're just on your device.
Yeah, exactly. And what that's doing to your brain and
Yeah.
your
Have
health.
what is that? There's a researcher, he's a psychologist, Adam Alter, I think is his name. He's like it was a popular TED Talk a couple of years ago.
Okay.
Does that sound familiar to you?
Yeah, a little
So
bit.
he talks about sort of like how our day is broken up, and a portion of our day is work, obviously. A portion of our day is sleep. Portion of our day is survival, he calls it. So like
self-care,
eating,
that kind of, okay.
like eating, showering.
Yeah.
And then a portion of our day is what he calls like our personal time, where most of us get our sense of purpose and fulfillment. So like what fuels our passions. And if you're lucky, you get that at work too. But the interaction with your hobbies and your friends and your passions and stuff, right? So it's like the slice of your day. And in 2000 and what year did the iPhone come out? 2007?
That was 2000. I thought it was like 2007,
Okay,
something like
so we'll
that.
just say 2007 for this purpose. Probably horribly messing up his TED. Just listen to the TED Talk. But
we'll put a link up to it.
Yeah, so he has this slice of the day that most people get this personal fulfillment time. And in 2007, that slice was like a pretty significant chunk. And now that slice is like this tiny little sliver because all of that is taken up with tech. Yeah,
Grabbing your phone.
Right,
and,
like looking at Twitter or or just
Unreal.
scrolling like constantly. You're not even really doing anything.
Totally.
You're just spacing out looking at your phone, right? So I think
Wow,
that's
scary.
really interesting is like not only that work piece that you're talking about, that constantly being on, but then also how much we're like wired now and what it does to our brain and our ability to disconnect and sleep. And I talk about it a lot when I'm doing trainings and things about like resilience and that ability to recharge and refuel is that people don't ever have that downtime to be able to like bounce back stronger. You know, you have to be really intentional.
It's a really big issue. In fact, there's a quote I wrote down and I actually shared with a coworker too. I thought that this is it's something I think about, but it's also just a cultural issue. I think we have a societal issue. So the quote is, "Busy is now cool.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
even become an aspirational bit of American culture. The higher up you go, the busier your calendar gets. References to crazy schedules in holiday cards have shot up since the 1960s. When Americans hear busy, they think status.
Yes.
Displays of busyness shows that society values you, that everybody wants a piece." End quote.
That really resonated with me too.
Powerful.
Right?
It's true. Okay. I know you've thought about this. Like when let's say you're at an event, a family event, a bunch of people hanging out. Somebody's pulling out their phone. They're on the phone with somebody. They're emailing. Part of you thinks, wow, they must be important, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. I think this is caught on. It's a cultural issue right now.
Yeah.
I don't know how to fix it because obviously tech is so involved in our lives right now. I think the busyness thing it's
like a status symbol.
It is crazy how we believe
Yeah.
that busyness is status.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy.
The culture of busy.
Yeah. What do you think about all that?
That really resonated with me too. I've been reading Brene Brown just like
Yeah,
everybody
I
else
love
in the
her.
world,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. You
And-
watched her Netflix special
Yes,
too. Of course
yeah,
you did.
Of course I did. Yeah, of course I did. But she talks a little bit about that in one of her earlier books. I think it's in her The Gifts of Imperfection book, but being willing to let go and go against the grain. Like you will not be the normal one at the table, or you will not be the normal one at your workplace if you make a conscious choice to disconnect, and sort of being okay with that unpopular decision for your own well-being. But it is pervasive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and like to your point, it's shifting. The culture has shifted big time. It's not just, I know millennials get a bad rap. It is not just millennials. Like the family gathering, like grandma and grandpa are on there, you know, it's cruising
It's
on
like,
social
oh,
media.
hey, they
Yeah.
must be smarter.
Yeah,
Like, they're
Like
up to something.
I know everybody's connected all the time, and it's hard for people to turn off
It
and
is.
what that's doing for our well-being. And then the
Yeah.
pressures of work, I mean, people respond all the time. In some companies, you're expected to respond all the time.
Exactly. I don't think that's healthy.
It's not healthy. Yeah.
You know, admittedly, I feel like I'm always connected. I enjoy it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, how are you all in to whatever you're doing if you're always connected? I think that's the
Right.
question I always have is like, are you like fully present?
Yeah.
I was together with some friends this weekend and we had a big gathering, and it's been a long time since we all were together, and I had my phone away. I didn't even have it near me. I had it in like a bag or something. And that was it was a good feeling. So like at work, you walk into a meeting, don't even bring your phone.
Right.
Don't bring a device.
Yeah.
Be all in to that meeting.
And then I think he talks about this in the book, but I might be remembering it from something else that I've read. But that sort of psychological agreement we make with ourselves about being needed. And so you might think in some jobs, absolutely, you are needed, right? You're on call or whatever. But, if you're in a meeting and you have your phone, somebody might need you, right?
That is true.
And that feels pretty fulfilling in some ways, that I'm needed. And so I never can be disconnected because I have to be accessible to my job or my client or whatever, right?
I get, but if you're always anticipating like an emergency, like, oh, somebody's going to need me, then so for every ding that you get on your phone, you're going to be looking at it. Like during a meeting.
People do.
I know, it's wild to me. Like, how often do emergencies really happen?
It depends on your line of work.
I guess that's true. Yes.
But kind of back to that status symbol thing. I mean, if you are managing a really big team, potentially people
how disrespectful is that to other people though? Like I think it has a bigger impact. Like okay, if an emergency happens and you're accessible, you're solving that one emergency, but I worry about like the bigger implications. Other people watching, they catch on. They're like, okay, well, this is a status symbol. This person's important because they're always paying attention to emergencies. I'm going to do it too because I want to be important.
Well, what you just said was really interesting. Other side of it is empowering your people to make independent decisions, which another thing. I mean, gosh, this guy should like pay me, I guess, because I'm talking about his book a lot. I'm literally, seriously. Jeffrey Pfeiffer, if you're listening.
Come on, royalties.
Royalties. But I think another interesting kind of point you just made is how much that's conditioning people to rely on one person to be their person. And so we know that having a sense of autonomy and job control and self-efficacy is really good for people's well-being. But if you're conditioning that you always have this other person accessible, that's not really enabling that for your team.
He talks about how working longer hours, it actually decreases productivity. I'm not even going to begin to cite all the work, but let's just say there was a lot of studies.
Yeah, I know, that's what I said. They're intimidating.
To prove this point.
Yeah.
There's literally on page 137 and 138, there's like, I want to say 5 or 6 bullet points of studies that have happened over time. I don't even know how they do these, but it basically just shows that like, okay, if you have a 10% increase in overtime, there's a 2.4% decrease in productivity. So this proves the point, like, okay, you work more than the regular hours. Yeah. You actually decrease in productivity if just by working more. Annual working time exceeds 1,925 hours, 0.9% decrease in productivity. So like there's studies like this that just proves the point that you work longer hours, you're not any more effective. What do you think about that? Do you believe it? Because I do.
I think people believe that they are more productive when they're putting in long hours, right? That's part of the sort of bargaining or rationalization we make with ourselves about doing the work is like, I'm here a lot. I must be getting a lot done. But in actuality, it's impacting your health and well-being in ways that maybe aren't as immediately tangible or accessible, but over time, I think, right? If you work one really long day every once in a while,
it's probably fine. Yeah.
Probably not as bad. I mean, everything in moderation, right?
Sure, yeah.
But if it's a pattern, I think that's where it starts to be really harmful to people.
And I think like when you compare like, okay, I'm going to work 1 hour totally refreshed and a normal working hour, and I'm going to be, productive to a certain degree. And then it's taken into account like, okay, if you're burned out and then you're working, 1 extra hour, what's the productivity of that hour look like compared to the other? I think that it it's kind of hard to compare. Like, what if you're working on something totally like that's why some of these studies are hard.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I've worked 12-hour days before.
Right.
And I'm probably pretty productive in that 12th hour compared to that first hour. It just depends on what you're doing.
Yeah, I don't know how I mean, I really don't. I am not a researcher. I don't know how they
Poor researcher.
That's not work. I love it. I like the value of it, but it's not something
It's fun to quote these because then we could just like rip it apart and or believe it. And I think a lot of us, we'd look at stats like these and say, okay, can't work long hours. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I want to poke holes in is like, is working long hours, for one, does it decrease productivity and is it ruining our health? I think that's ultimately the questions I want to answer.
I think that the research says yes, right? I mean, I think that's what it points to is that over time, having consistently fatigued, exhausted workers impacts their health and well-being.
Yep. There's and we'll wrap up here in a second. There's a part on like toxic workplaces, which I thought was fascinating. It was basically just saying like people stay in toxic workplaces. It destroys their health, their well-being, but yet they stay. Why do they stay? It becomes like a norm, like they're in it so long and the people around them, they just sort of, it becomes ingrained in the culture and they just stay. What kind of impact does that have on their health?
Yeah.
And what kind of societal issues does that bring up?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the issues he talks about is just economic necessity, that people need jobs and
feel like they can't go somewhere else.
It's kind of the devil, right?
Yeah.
Like, would it be better somewhere else? Or maybe you're just so exhausted and burnt out that it's sort of that like sense of hopelessness, right? That you can't see you can't see beyond it. You're stuck in this hopeless web of, would it be better? I'm too exhausted to try to make something work somewhere else. You feel sort of broken down in your ability to even look for something else. And then that culture piece is really interesting. I think we see that in some, I'm not going to name companies, but you see in companies that there is a culture of, this is how we do it. And everybody there has drank the Kool-Aid, and there must be something wrong with you if you think, that you shouldn't be expected to sacrifice your family for your work, and you shouldn't be expected to have pay equity and, all these different things, right? Like, it's your fault that you don't think that this is how it's done, because clearly this is how it's done, And I think that those cultures are really pervasive, and they're hard for people to
rise up out of it.
Yeah, or break into, Like, maybe you love your job, but if that's the culture, that takes a big shift.
Yeah, it's funny because I in reading this book, it's so negative in a way. It's we talked about it earlier. It's a little depressing.
It's a downer for sure.
And it's like I think it's the last section or last chapter really talks about, okay, where do we go from here? Like, what are the employers? What can we do? And I think as I was reading every single chapter, I'm like, okay, here's the issue he's outlined. Here's the impacts culturally. We just need to make a shift. Or it's employers have an opportunity to rise above this and to make some changes internally.
Yeah.
And not only will there be an employer choice, but they might have a more productive workforce. So I don't know if you would have all the answers. I'm curious what you think about, like, what can employers do to really make the shift from, a toxic work environment to not working long hours to providing health insurance. Like, what's the silver bullet in all this to put a bow on this conversation?
I mean, I guess back to some research. So Leslie Hammer is someone at PSU. She's at OHSU and PSU here in Portland, and has done a lot of research about that. How do workplaces impact employee health, like from this lens? And so one part is more of that like policy and structural and advocating at a governmental level But the other thing is just recognizing, so an employer, we're recognizing this is happening in our workplace. We're going to do something different. And he writes about that in the book, certain, influential leaders and companies that had sort of an aha moment for whatever reason. I mean, Patagonia gets like a ton of good PR, right? For like, they're basically saying like, we care about our people. We're going to treat them this way. This is how we're going to do it. So policies in the broader kind of community is harder. But in your company, if you're in a position to make policy decisions in your company, making sure that those are in place and that they're observed. So I was talking to this person, I know we're trying to wrap up, but I was talking to this person. She does research on work-family conflict. That's her job. And she was on maternity leave. She had a newborn and her boss asked her to be on a conference call. And I was like, what? Like, how incongruent is that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So not only do you have to have these policies in place, but people observing them, leaders play a huge role.
Sets the tone.
So big. So being able to like walk the walk, encourage people to utilize whatever is in place for their well-being within the company. And I think those are the two sort of like, you asked about like the silver bullet, right? Like those are from an employer standpoint, I think those are the places where you have to start, like having your policies in place internally and then having your leaders observe those policies, model those policies, soliciting input from your employees, implementing things based on what their needs are, those kinds of things. Because wellness programs historically are like, exercise more, eat better, use your EAP, which is great. Absolutely. I think all those things should be in place. And like, how do we impact this system? And the only way you can impact the system is to have that like in place on the policy level and then with your leaders implementing those.
I 100% agree with that. Yeah. So. Well, it's been a really fun discussion. Again, we talked about the book Dying for a Paycheck, written by Jeffrey Pfeffer. Pfeffer, yeah.
There goes our royalties.
There's the royalties gone. Hey, Jeffrey, send us some money
for plugging your book.
Yeah, for plugging your book nonstop. This honestly, I don't think this is the end of the conversation. I think this is it's a big issue right now. I'm glad we were able to talk about it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun. So, where can people connect with you, learn more about what you're doing?
Yes.
Plug anything you want.
Oh, okay.
Go.
Yeah. Let's see. So my name's Anna Miners, and I work for a company, Cascade Centers, which is headquartered in Portland, Oregon. We have clients nationwide, but we get to live in the rainy Pacific Northwest. And so we provide EAP services and wellness services and work with companies to try to integrate the things that we're talking about into their workplace, right? So part of what we do is help support people individually for healthy behavior change. But the other piece is how do we support organizations and employers in doing that? Like, what does that look like? How do I do it? How can we do that within our structure and our goals and things like that? So yeah, I'm actually one of those lucky ones that we were talking about that gets to integrate passion into work and being able to really help people around some of these things we're talking about.
Well, thanks for coming on, Anna. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.